Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Crimson and in this video we are going to be continuing our look through the Bloodborne official artworks book. Part 1 was uploaded 1 or 2 weeks ago depending on my quote-unquote upload schedule. I'm going to try and make this a 3-parter. I don't want it to be a 4-parter. So we're gonna try and cover a decent amount in this book. Where we left off last time was after looking at some art and concept art of Abritus, the Left Behind Great One, and we are going to be picking up from there. And as always, we are joined by my doll Nendoroid and my hunter Nendoroid. They are my moral support for this video. Now, just before we actually get into the art book, I just want to address 2 things. The first being in part 1, I had mentioned I was going to put a picture of my Bloodborne cosplay in the video. Upon editing, I realized that in those pictures, it is a potential doxing hazard, so I'm either not going to be including it, or if I do include it, it will just be a PNG of me in the costume rather than the full picture itself. And the second thing I wanted to just quickly clarify, and I'm going to make an effort both in this series and going forward, I've noticed that just due to the lighting in my current setup, the left page always has a really high amount of glare. Just if we quickly swap to a random page, you guys will see what I mean. That when I'm showing it to you, there's a bit of glare in the corner or sometimes the whole page. I'm going to try my best to alleviate that by holding the left page up a little bit to get rid of the glare. So if you guys find a noticeable difference in this, please do let me know, because I don't want the glare to end up potentially ruining the video for you guys. So let's just flip. Don't mind my eyedrop bookmark. I could not find my other bookmarks, so we make do on this channel. So this is where we left off before, with multiple angles and multiple pictures of Abritus. Again, just to show you, that's the glare with the page down. That's with me holding it up a little bit. So I'm going to be doing this from now on. I'm going to try not to cover too much of the page with my thumb. And yeah, so the next section after this is Old Yharnam, which is one of my favorite areas in Bloodborne. But in saying that, basically every area is one of my favorite areas, but I like this area just based on its environmental storytelling alone. So here we see a hunter walking through Old Yharnam with a torch in hand. Old Yharnam was burnt to the ground due to the essentially ground zero of the Plague of the Beasts, and the church may or may not have given the residents poison or medicine that cures poison to help it, which is interesting. It's like, hey, why would these guys need poison resistance in an area that supposedly isn't poisoned? So here we have some of the decorations and architecture is the word I meant to say, that we find throughout Old Yharnam. In statues, on buildings, we have some of these little statues here, which we can find on the sides of multiple buildings. They look very similar to the Bat Messengers. I'm not sure if they actually are meant to be Bat Messengers. And here we can see a seemingly dead hunter, or at least a person hung upside down in the usual manner, very similar to the hunter's mark, which is essentially just an upside down corpse. And here is one of my favorite characters in the game. This is Jura, the old hunter, and him is probably one of the reasons this area is so memorable to me. So when you first enter Oldianum, you get a warning from him, essentially saying that, hey, these quote-unquote beasts that you're slaying aren't beasts, they're people, and that these beasts mean no harm, so don't harm them. And if you do harm them, he opens up fire with his Gatling gun. However, the beasts are not docile. They will attack you, so if you defend yourself, he will still shoot you with the Gatling gun. I do wish in this area that the beasts were actually totally unhostile. It would just make it interesting to actually be able to walk through and see it without actually having to kill anyone. And these two guys, or actually no, sorry, this is the same hunter, just in different attire. This one he has his cloak and jacket on. This one he just has his normal top. This is the hunter that we fight at the base of Jura's clock tower. Anyone who has played Bloodborne will remember this man very, very well. I certainly do. I remember my encounter with him the first time and getting absolutely decimated by him. But Jura is, apart from just his moral system and beliefs, his design is very cool. He's very similar to Gurman. He's a very old hunter. He used to be a dreamer as well. So he once visited and used the hunter's workshop in the dream, not the actual workshop, because he says, you know, when he kills you, he says, next time you dream, you know, give this some thought. So he knows what your player character is and what situation there is, which just goes to show his wisdom and his seniority as a very old member of the Hunters. This is inside the main chapel or church that we fight our way through. This is the base. We have this creature here hung up on display. I can't tell based on this picture if it is a beast that has been covered with a cloak, or if that is skin from the beast. Based on the boss of this area, which we'll see in a couple pages, I am leaning more towards skin, because we'll actually, you know what, I'll save that for when we get to that boss. This is the beast type enemy that we first find in Oldianum, and it's interesting because, and I did not know this until going through this artbook, their official name is the Beast Patient rather than just a beast. So this kind of indicates that these were people who were treated in Oldianum when the Beast Plague first came through, and whether by design or just due to the Plague of the Beasts, they ended up completely turning fully. Just more very sinister stuff that the Healing Church is up to. Here's some more architecture from the inside of the church. So this is the altar statue. We have here, we have the lower parish area. This is kind of like a zoomed out view of it, and this is the boss of this area. This is the blood-starved beast, and as you can see, he has his back completely flayed. I say he, I have no idea what gender this individual might have been before transformation, so we'll just go ahead and say they. But just flipping back, it's very similar to it's the same color as what's covering this beast here. So I do believe that it is skin. But yeah, the Bloodstarved Beast, while a fairly easy boss and one of the very early on bosses, definitely one of the more memorable bosses in the game. Next up, we are starting the section on the Hemwick Charnel Lane. This is another really cool area. What's cool about this area, in my opinion, is that the enemies that we fight here aren't beasts, or not your typical covered in hair lichen looking beasts. They are seemingly all women who have lost their mind, whether due to the Scourge of the Beasts, whether due to the treatment of the Healing Church, or whether just from the stress and insanity of the hunt. Sorry about that. My phone decided to automatically update during the recording, so we are starting again from the Hemwick Charnel Lane, except this is 2 hours after I had initially started the recording. So yeah, let's just start and continue. Let's not waste too much time with the second intro. So this is some of the details of the environment of the Hemwick Lane. You know, we have some of the outside, we have some of the interiors of some of the dwellings. This is the lift mechanism with the little cage that we activate further on into the level, just as a shortcut to the boss. We have a picture here of one of the dog enemies, just called a hunting dog. But as you can see, it is not only heavily mutated or infected, but also covered in either spikes or swords or blades of some kind. So very ferocious looking animal, and if you've ever played a From Software game, you know that dogs mean very serious business. Sorry, I'm trying to find the right zoom level for this. So let's continue. Some more images of the Hemwick Charnel Lane. We have some of the outside with all of the graves. This is the gate, guarded by the massive man with the axe. I cannot remember that enemy type's name. I do apologize. This is one of the main buildings that we fight our way through. Here are some of the weapons that the women in the lane wield. We have cleavers, we have torches, we have sickles, and this is my personal favorite of them. This kind of, I don't know what it's called, not quite a spear, not quite a halberd, but also glowing at the end. So very, very dangerous weapon. This is one of the enemies that I was talking about earlier. She is called the Hemwick Grave Woman. So as I mentioned earlier, the enemies in this area are all women, and they don't appear to be beasts, but they are certainly gone mad, whether from insight, whether from stress, whether from just going insane due to the hunt. My guess is on insight based on how the boss operates. Some more pictures here. This is the Witch of Hemwick here. I'll talk about her in a second because I have a little tidbit or a fun fact. And here is Carith. I know some people say Carol, but From Software takes a lot of inspiration from the Welsh language, and two L's at the end of a word comes out as a th sound, so it's carrot, or carrot. Sorry, I do not speak Welsh. I am Irish, so for any Welsh viewers, I do apologize. As you can see, Carrot has been nailed or tied to a chair and tortured heavily. And this is where we first get the tool to engrave Careth runes onto our mind. So, the tidbit, a little fun fact about the Witch of Hemwick that I was talking about. If you've played the game, you know that she teleports and goes invisible all over the map. And then once you get her to half health, a second one spawns. So you have to fight two of them while fighting various shadow demons. However, if you go into this encounter with 0 insight, she will not teleport, she will not be invisible, she just appears as a regular person and you can instantly just absolutely decimate her because she is a weak boss. It just goes to show how, you know, the insight is messing with our mind and our perception. So the more insight we have, the more we're kind of in tune with her cosmic abilities. Moving on from here, these are some of the enemies that we encounter in the area. This is another picture of the Witch of Hemwick in a lot more detail. As you can see, she is a very hunchback, old-looking woman. She may not be super old, but she looks old. She is covered in eyes. You can see one here, you can see some here, you can see some eyes dangling around her garments here. And just like many of the women in this area, her weapon, I don't know the name of this weapon, but it's essentially an eye gouger. So if she or one of the other women manages to get you in a grab attack, she will rake this weapon across your eyes. So these people obviously go ahead and take people's eyes. This is the Mad One, as I meant, or the shadow creatures that I mentioned during the Witch of Hemwick boss fight. Honestly, these guys aren't that bad, but during the fight they swarm you, so what starts off as a standard enemy that's easy to fell ends up becoming quickly overwhelming. The next area is the Forbidden Woods. Now, there is not a single environment or area in Bloodborne that I do not love. However, the Forbidden Woods is probably my least favorite of the bunch, just because I'm not that big on the enemies, I'm not that big on the outside environment. The inside environment is very cool for some of the windmills and buildings and stuff, but it's a very tedious area. And this is also our first encounter with someone wielding a cannon, and it's actually cool. If you run past all the enemies, kill the man at the cannon, you can then use the cannon to then shoot his fellow comrades, which is just, it's not really that practical, because by the time you shoot the cannon and the projectile travels, the enemies have usually moved, but it's just a nice little addition. So here we have some of the Forbidden Woods area. This is the outside, obviously, with some of the wooden shacks. Same down here. This is one of the buildings that we traverse through. We end up going up on the roof, I believe. If it's not this building, then it is, actually no, sorry, it is this building. I do apologize, that is my fault. They just kind of look the same. Maybe that's just me, but you know. Again, another great picture. I absolutely love this one. So here is a hunter. He's kind of hard to see because it's a very dark image, and he's essentially just a silhouette. He has his saw cleaver in his right hand and a torch in his left hand. And this is the main windmill of this area, which is tedious to fight your way through, but man, it does look cool. Here are some of the enemies that we encounter. So this enemy is called a snake ball. As you can guess, they are a ball of snakes and serpents. If you are familiar with what a rat king is, that's where a bunch of rats get their tails entangled, so they end up becoming this this essentially biomass of, you know, like 30 rats, all with their tails tangled and they can't escape. That's what these enemies remind me of, but just with snakes and serpents. This enemy is called the snake parasite. So when you first see this enemy, he starts off as a regular looking man. Normal clothes, normal headgear, nothing out of the ordinary. So, you know, you go up to him thinking, oh, this will be easy. And then when you approach him, his head explodes into this mass of writhing tentacles and snakes. For me personally, it reminds me a lot of Resident Evil 4 with the Lost Plagas, how some of the later enemies, you know, if you shoot them enough or shoot their heads off, the parasite will pop out of their head. That was my first thought upon seeing this. And yeah, as much as I hate fighting these guys, I have to admit their design is very, very cool. So this is inside of the windmill. You can see that it has its gears that, you know, make the windmill able to work, and you're able to climb across these gears to get some extra items. Sorry about that, I stuttered there. I hope that's visible, because even for me looking at it, it is a extremely dark image. Another picture of the windmill here, just from different angles and a little bit further away. This is the cannon that I was talking about, that you're able to kill the cannon wielder and use. However, if he does manage to shoot a cannon at you, you're going to have a very, very bad time, if not die instantly. So here are some characters that we meet in this area. Sorry, I had to take a drink of water, my mouth was dry. So, these two are armor sets that we can find in this area. The first being the Graveguard attire, which looks very kind of feral, kind of cult-like, with the hoods, with the very dilapidated rags. You know, these guys obviously live in a massive graveyard outside in the untamed wilderness. However, in my opinion, the far more interesting of the two is this attire. This is the white hunter attire. I think I mentioned this in part 1. However, at the beginning of the hunt, the healing church had two kinds of high-ranking hunters: the white church hunters and the black church hunters. I won't get into the black church hunters for now. However, the white church hunters were the quote-unquote good guys compared to the black hunters. these guys, while very skilled warriors, were mainly used as doctors. So instead of, if they encountered someone who was suffering from the scourge of the beasts, or they believed was in the process of turning into a beast, rather than just slaughter them outright, the white church hunters conducted medical research on them to try and find a cure and alleviate their suffering. Now, it's not super clear what kind of treatment this was, or if this treatment was voluntary, if this was, say, kind, compassionate care, such as, like treatment trying to make the patient comfortable, or strap the patient down and do whatever you wish to him, or her, sorry. Here is the Master of the League. This is one of the first NPCs we encounter in this area. He's right near the first lantern. He serves as one of the factions in Bloodborne that you can join for PvP. Bloodborne doesn't have that many factions, or as they're called in the Souls games, covenants, but he is one of them. And what I find very funny and very cool about his design is his helmet, if you can call it a helmet, is essentially a bucket over his head with a hole cut out for one eye. So it's very, very impractical, but it is funny, and as a fellow one-eyed individual myself, I think it goes ridiculously hard. Now, here is the boss of this area, the Shadows of Yharnam. These guys are infamous in the Bloodborne community between their weapons. If you haven't played Bloodborne, it is a 3-on-1 fight where one is ranged, one is ranged but kind of like close-up ranged, and the other one is pure melee. So you'll be fighting the melee guy while having the other one shoot fireballs at you, while having the other guy creep up behind you and spew fire on your back. Very, very challenging fight for your first time, and if you're not sure what to do. Now, what's cool and what makes these guys even worse is once you get each of them to a certain health point, they transform into snake or serpent versions of themselves, and each one is their own separate serpent version. So one of them can have snakes pop up from the ground at the spot you're standing. One of them can essentially stretch all the way across the map and hit you, and they do insane damage. So if you're good at crowd control, this boss is fairly straightforward, but if not, they are very, very difficult, but I do love them. So this is our last page for this area. This is it is called a Grave of a Great One. So it sounds like that either a Great One or someone who was in commune with a Great One was either buried here, or this is a gravestone to commemorate them. I'm more in favor of commemorating them if they are for actual great ones. However, if they are for someone who was in touch with the great ones, I would say they are more accurately graves. And if you know this area, you know some of the graves can be absolutely tiny, only reaching up to your hunter's knee or even smaller. and some of them absolutely tower over your hunter. So it just goes to show the different types of people or beings that were buried here, if any were actually buried and they weren't just commemorative. The next area is one of the most iconic buildings and areas in all of Bloodborne. This is the Bergenworth Lecture Hall. This is where everything started. This is where they started exploring the tombs. This is where they found the source of the old blood. So everything bad that happens in Bloodborne started right here. Here's some great images of the Academy in black and white. Here is a statue of a messenger. I'm not sure if they just mean a messenger in general or a bath messenger. By the appearance, it looks like a just standard messenger type person. These ones, however, are called odd-looking statues. However, these ones, in my opinion, look a lot more like bath messengers, so that's just interesting. What I always find really cool about not just the Bloodborne art book, but From Software art books in general, is you find out what each enemy type is actually called, like their official name. You might know that certain enemies have certain names or certain factions, but this makes it very clear under no uncertain terms what each enemy is properly called, which I think is super cool. So here we have our hunter with his saw cleaver and torch at the gates of the academy or lecture hall. This enemy type, which probably catches everyone's eye once you see it for the first time, is called a fluorescent flower, based on this little design here. He is the one who shoots what appears to be many galaxies at you. And this enemy here is called a Garden of Eyes. This and another enemy, which I'll mention afterwards, are first real indications in Bloodborne that, wait a minute, we're not just fighting werewolves or beasts, we're fighting God knows what, Lovecraftian eldritch abominations. Just look at these things. You know, this one in game has a very insectoid look. He has a massive head covered in eyes, and he has a very vicious grab attack. Now we're just going to quickly turn the page to see if we see it. No, we do not. So the other enemy that we encounter here for the first time is the brain sucker enemy. These are a corpse white enemy with a human body but a very alien head, and they will freeze you and they will run up and they will shove their massive tentacle for their head either down your throat or into your head and drain any insight that you have. So very dangerous enemy. And like I said, our first real hint that we're dealing with something more than just werewolves and hairy men. And women too, because, you know, the plague of the beasts is gender neutral. Here we have our hunter in the lecture hall exploring. These are some of the scholars that we find, very mutilated. This man's face looks fairly intact, whereas this man's face looks half melted off and gaunt hands. We also find these individuals in the part of the lecture hall which has been transported to the Nightmare Realm. Now this is a very interesting character here. The official name for this character is simply called the Spider, but this is Bloodborne's version of Patches. If you know Patches or have played any From Software game, including Demon Souls, Demon Souls, Bloodborne, all the Dark Souls games, and Elden Ring, the only game in which Patches does not appear is Sekiro, and I believe that's just because he wouldn't fit in with the whole, theme of feudal Ashina. But we won't get too much into Sekiro yet anyway. We'll get into Sekiro a lot more later on. Okay, moving on. So this is a really good picture. We have our hunter, as always, with his trusty saw spear and torch. I like how in this book, the player character hunter seems to be the same character with the same weapons and armor throughout. It just kind of adds to the whole, like, this is the journey of one hunter versus just many hunters that they use to get the screenshots or the inspiration for the artwork. So this is in the Bergenworth school. The hunter is looking at all of these jars of eyes that you can see. There's some on the table here. There's some in these pots. And, if you're playing Bloodborne and you're in Bergenworth and you roll through any of these pots, they just explode with eyes because Master Wilhelm, the leader of Bergenworth, was obsessed with gaining eyes to gain more insight. In his own words, he wanted to line his own brain with eyes to become closer to the Great Ones. This is some more inside of Bergenworth. This is the staircase leading up to the higher levels. We have a counter here with lots of candles, lots of jar specimens and everything. Speaking of specimens, we have a specimen here. I actually can't remember seeing one of these in the game. Maybe it's just something that's in one of the preserved jars in Bergenworth. But I'm assuming this is the cage that they kept him in. Or kept it in, because I'm not even really sure what that is. Or even if it's human. This is a picture again of the grand staircase leading up to the second level of Bergenworth, and if you've played Bloodborne, you know there's a very dangerous hunter up here. So here, I don't know if you guys will be able to make it out, but this is the final conversation between Lawrence, who went on to found the Healing Church, who was Master Wilhelm's apprentice or star student, and this is the dialogue that we hear after we touch Lawrence's skull after we defeat Vicar Amelia, so I will read it out for you. I'm not gonna say, I'm not gonna go like Lawrence said, Wilhelm said, but I'll just read it out. So we start with Lawrence and then go to Wilhelm, and I apologize. If I could, I would, but I cannot do voices for the life of me. So we're starting with Lawrence. Master Wilhelm, I have come to bid you farewell. Oh, I know. You seek now to betray me. No, but you will never listen. I tell you, I will not forget our adage. We were born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open. Fear the old blood, they both say in unison. I must take my leave, says Lawrence. By the gods, fear it, Lawrence, says Wilhelm. So, if you're unfamiliar with Bloodborne, Master Wilhelm, who was essentially the headmaster at Bergenworth, wanted to continue knowledge and continue learning about the Old Blood because he knew the dangers that would come with it, whereas Lawrence wanted to use the Old Blood to try and help people, or at least that was his initial goal. We all know how that turns out. And the two of them ended up having a rift and a disagreement that led to their separation, causing a schism in Bergenworth. Those who were loyal to Lawrence and his beliefs, and those who were loyal to Master Wilhelm and his beliefs. So this is Master Wilhelm here as we see him in the game. We see him on the balcony of Bergenworth looking at the lake and the moon. As you can see, he's a very, very old man. He has a staff that has some eyes on it. He has, they're not tentacles, but he has some kind of growths, I'm assuming, from dabbling with the blood on his neck and on his face, and he's also covered in eyes. So this is him at his lowest point after essentially everything that he worked for had been taken from him, betrayed by the people who he trusted most, and is now just a very, very sad old man. If you actually kill Wilhelm, when you meet him, you get the, I believe it's the Eye rune, which is one of the Kareth runes you can use, which essentially, I forgot to mention when we mentioned Kareth earlier, Kareth runes serve as Bloodborne's equivalent to rings in Dark Souls, or talismans in Elden Ring. They essentially give you little buffs, like, you know, let's see, what's a good example, you know, like, they give you little buffs, stuff like, you know, gaining more blood echoes. When you die, enemies are more likely to drop blood vials, or more gameplay focused stuff like increased damage dealt, but also increased damage taken. This is Rom, the vacuous spider, who we fight after jumping into the lake, that Wilhelm is looking out for. It is said that the spider of Bergenworth hides all truth, and Rom once was a student at Bergenworth, and they tried and failed to create their own Great One, and what they ended up with was someone who is kin. Kin is an enemy type in Bloodborne. They're more of the astral cosmic style of enemies. So he's not a Great One. He's not human. He's kind of like humanity's botched attempt, and his boss fight is fairly simplistic, but it triggers essentially the second stage of the game. I'm not gonna explain what vacuous means in case you don't know, just because it's direct, or the closest term to it is rather offensive, but it essentially means Rom, the very stupid spider, but put a little bit less politely, if you know what I mean. This is what we see after we defeat Rom. It says here, when the red moon hangs low, the line between man and beast is blurred, and when the great ones descend, a womb will be blessed with child. We'll talk about what that means later on once we get to it. But this is the moon that changes to the next stage of the game. As you can see, this is what they call in the game a blood moon. It has this very red tinge. This picture only has like a slight red tinge. In the game, it is like blood red. But yeah, that's one of the interesting things about killing Ron, is it really changes the game, and it essentially puts the Scourge of the Beast into overdrive. Anyone who wasn't turned or had only slightly turned is now a full-fledged, not just a beast, but an absolutely vicious beast with no mercy. And enemies in the next couple areas become much more ferocious and aggressive because of it. So our next location is Yahagul, the Unseen Village. You can actually enter this area fairly easy. I believe it's after you defeat Vicar Amelia. If you exit through the front door of the Chapel of Odin, which is essentially the hub in Cathedral Ward, directly to your right is a man, a very pale man with a hat, with a staff and a bag, who is covered in a massive cloak. And if you die to him, he kidnaps you, and you wake up in the bag, and then you end up in a cell. This is the cell here. Oh no, sorry, that's not the cell. I apologize. I'm very tired. This is part of the architecture. But you end up in a cell in Yahagul. So, for some reason, people have been kidnapped and brought to Yahagul for some reason, which we will soon uncover. Like I said in the first part, I'm trying my best to describe the events of Bloodborne without, really going into spoilers. This is the enemy type here, the kidnapper. I'm not sure if you can see him, but he has his cloak. He's holding his sack over his left shoulder. This is the bag here. And these are some of the carriages that you find near Hargul. Some of them are thrashing, some of them have wailing coming from them. Some of them, if you get too close, giant centipede-like monstrosities jump out at you and attack you. So obviously the victims of the kidnapping to Yahagul is not a fate that you would like, and there's an NPC that you can meet if you've been kidnapped. She is I can't remember her official title, but she's essentially a nun of the Healing Church. And this is just full on me rambling about Bloodborne, so skip maybe 2 minutes if you're not really interested in this. But when you first meet her, she's absolutely terrified, which is understandable. Her name is Adela. The only way to recruit her and save her, and by recruit her I mean bring her back to the Chapel of Odin, is if you wear the attire of the White Hunter, the White Church Hunter set, she will recognize you as a member of the clergy, and she will be like, "Thank you for rescuing me." And you can send her to one of two places, one of which being the Chapel of Odin, which, if you haven't played Bloodborne and would like to, always send people to the Chapel of Odin. Won't say why, but yeah. Some more architecture here. The Gothic looking architecture in these games is so good. These are some of the statues that we find. This one here has a head very similar to both Rom and an enemy type or a creature called an amygdala. This one here just has a mass of tentacles, and it almost looks like one of the umbilical cords that you need for one of the endings. So this is the Yahagul black attire. This is actually one of my favorite armor sets in the game. It's one of the few armor sets in Bloodborne to actually have metal in it. It has a metal helmet, as you can see here, and a metal faceplate. Most of the armor in Bloodborne is essentially just Victorian-era clothing, because if you explore the Chalice dungeons, you find out that when the Scourge of the Beasts first started up, knights were sent in to the Chalice dungeons to try and slay the beasts. But in their heavy armor, they were too slow and ended up getting ripped apart. So the hunters and the church quickly realized that we need speed rather than defense to defeat these creatures, which is just a cool explanation of like why people are walking around, you know, killing beasts in top hats and monocles and cloaks and just normal clothes rather than full-on armor compared to Dark Souls or Elden Ring. Bloodborne has a lot less armor sets than both of those games, but in my opinion, and same with the weapons, the armor sets are so much cooler, but that's just subjective to my opinion. We have some more architecture here that we find in Yahagul. This is the bell ringer enemy. She essentially acts as someone who provokes all of the enemies and also resurrects them if you do not kill her in time. She's also part of a boss fight, which we will soon cover because that boss fight is also in Yahagul. Some more architecture here, statues, cathedrals. Yahagul is very dilapidated based on it being the unseen village, you know, it was hidden from the rest of the world. We have some people here in their clothing. This is the cramped casket. This is the creature that will jump out of those wagons that I mentioned. Very scary for the first time you play, when you walk up to one and one of these things just jumps out and kills you in 2 hits. Some more artwork of Yahagul with the moon in the background. We have a quote here. It says, "Behold a pale blood sky." And if you remember, our only instruction up until this point in Bloodborne is to seek the pale blood. We're never really given an answer as to what pale blood actually is, but it's just cool that that term keeps popping up even this late into the game. This is the boss of Yahagul, the One Reborn. So, apologies, I just had to take a drink of water. So let's have a little bit of a lore dump, shall we? So Yahagul is home to a group called the School of Mensis, led by a man named Mikolash. Mikolash was also a scholar at Bergenworth, who left with Lawrence, but then left Lawrence to go pursue his own ideals and agenda, and in the process went quite mad. So you might be looking at this and saying, what is this? The One Reborn, what does that mean? This is the result of all of the kidnappings and all of the blood rituals that has taken place in Yahagul. This is the School of Mensis' attempt to create their very own Great One. And it does not turn out well. This entity is made up of multiple individuals, all of which are writhing and screaming in pain, constantly bleeding, constantly vomiting. It just is an absolute nightmare to be a part of this thing, and is one of truly the most disgusting bosses in the game. Part of this boss fight is having to take care of some of the bell ringer women that we saw a couple pages ago. This is just some black and white illustrations of the One Reborn. So we have one person here, you can kind of see him here. He has a bit more skin in this one, whereas here he's more of a skeleton. You can see some more skeletons in and around here. I'm trying to see, can I see any other body parts? But you see there's multiple legs, there's multiple limbs reaching out, all of which are grasping. You can see it more easily here. You know, there's a couple human legs here, whereas at the front it's more of a monstrosity. But yeah, very poor fate to these poor souls who were taken to Yahar'gul. I forgot to remove my bookmark, that's embarrassing. On to our next area, the Nightmare of Mensis. So, Mikolash and his followers all left the physical plane and entered what's called a nightmare, which is basically a little pocket dimension created by the Great Ones, or the people who have gained enough insight are able to create. So this is the Nightmare Realm created by the School of Mensis. There's a couple other Nightmare Realms created by not Great Ones, but amygdalas, which aren't quite Great Ones, but are definitely not of this world. I hope we get to see one soon. This is what the architecture in the Nightmare of Mensis looks like. It's all twisted. The architecture is all, you know, rocks shaped like skulls. We have the lever here. This is where we activate the shortcut. This is the lift that we use for said shortcut. Also the lift here. The nightmares are absolutely horrifying places filled with the most vile creatures imaginable. This is entering one of the rooms in the Nightmare of Mensis. Anyone who has arachnophobia probably has this room seared into their memory permanently, because when you walk in, about 15 massive spiders jump down at you all at once. So these are some of the creatures that we find in the Nightmare of Mensis. So this is Murgo's attendant. Very small creatures. They have a whip, and some of them have a knife that they will use to grab you. Murgo we will discuss later. You might be asking, who's Murgo and why does he need attendants? We will find out shortly. This is the giant lost child, a very formidable enemy, capable of dealing out massive damage to the player. I did not know that this enemy's name was actually the giant lost child, so I wonder if this once was a child who got trapped in the nightmare and then twisted into this, or if it means that this is like a child of the nightmare that was born of the nightmare, meaning like he just came into existence. I'm not quite sure about that, I apologize. This is Murgo's chief attendant with their chains and massive cleavers. These guys are very big compared to the attendants, so think of these guys as almost like the overseer of the attendants, or the headman. Some more architecture inside the Nightmare of Mensis. The deeper we go in, the more twisted the architecture becomes. We see some floating platforms here. The nightmares do not abide by any rules of our world, any rules of physics, any rules of what should exist, what shouldn't exist, and all kinds of creatures and people are in the nightmare, whether they were born or created by the nightmare or entered the nightmare willingly with Mikolash, or were dragged into the nightmare and then ended up being twisted beyond all recognition. All of them inhabit these nightmares. And speaking of Mikolash, this is him himself, Mikolash, host of the nightmare. So he is the one who has created this nightmare. His followers were all transported into the nightmare, but Mikolash was the one who created it. All of his followers have this cage around their head, as if to not allow forces to enter their head or disturb them. You can actually unlock this headpiece in the game. It's very cool, and I find it not on Mikolash or the way you find him, but it's actually very funny to wear, I think. When you find Mikolash after defeating the One Reborn, him and all of his followers are dead. They're all in seemingly a lecture hall, Mikolash in the center of the room with all of his students and followers sitting around him in an amphitheater. So what happened was they all entered the nightmare, and whether by not wanting to leave or not being able to leave, their physical bodies all died. In the case of Mikolash, he wanted to stay in the nightmare. He did not want to leave. His followers, on the other hand, who knows? And Mikolash is a very memorable boss fight, but certainly one of the most annoying ones, because it involves chasing him around from room to room, and he has this one spell which is capable of one-shotting you, so there's nothing like chasing him around the nightmare for about 8 minutes, finally getting the chance to do some damage to him, getting one shot by him, and then having to start all over again. And if you've played Bloodborne, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Trust me, I'll never forget. This is Mikolash's boss arena. This is where we chase him throughout this labyrinth that he has created for himself. He has completely lost his mind in the nightmare. If he wasn't insane before entering the nightmare, he is fully insane now, and the entire time of the boss fight, and as you're chasing him, he's rambling. If you've ever heard the phrase cause, or some say cosm, that's a line from Mikolash that he says all the time. We'll get to cause and who and what that is later on. So here is who I was just talking about. Oh, I forgot to mention, this is after we defeat Mikolash and after we keep ascending up the Tower of the Nightmare. So, this is the boss room of Murgo's wet nurse. Murgo is the child between the Great One Odin, known as the Formless Odin, and Queen Yharnam, who is a Thumerian. What's interesting is, and I'm going to quickly discuss Murgo before we discuss who this is here. Odin is known as the Formless Great One, so he does not have a physical body. Like I said in part 1, all of the Great Ones are all physically unique, and because of that, they are unable to breed with each other. So to make new Great Ones, they have to have surrogates, which means impregnating human women. Thus, the child with Queen Yharnam, it's not exactly clear how consensual it is, if it's consensual at all, if, being impregnated by eldritch monstrosity is even remotely interesting. But because he is the formless Great One, the crib is empty, but it's not empty. That is just because, like his father, Murgo doesn't have a physical form, which is really, really cool. Now this is Murgo's wet nurse. It's never made clear exactly what this creature is, whether it's a great one, whether it's something born of the nightmare, whether it's something that Odin created to defend his child, but she is able to teleport around, make copies of herself, and is actually a fairly easy boss fight despite being one of the cooler designs in the game. And the whole time that you're fighting Murgo's wet nurse, you hear the cries of baby Murgo. So, yeah. And you actually only get, after you defeat Murgo's wet nurse, in normal From Software games, when you get the, or when you defeat a boss, you get a message like, enemy felled, or on Bloodborne it often says prey slaughtered. But after you defeat Murgo's wet nurse, nothing pops up until you attack or roll into or somehow destroy the cradle. And instead of the normal Bloodborne messages like prey slaughtered, beast slain, we get the unique message nightmare ended. So in defeating Murgo's wet nurse and killing baby Murgo, we have ended the nightmare of Mensis. So this dimension, created by Mikolash, and probably by Odin as well, let's be honest, is completely destroyed. And I mentioned earlier with the Shadows of Yharnam, they are Queen Yharnam's kind of bodyguards, I would say. But because Queen Yharnam is below this boss room, kind of looking up at her child with a bleeding stomach and bleeding womb, the Shadows of Yharnam are prowling around in the area. Now you might be asking, how could they be prowling around the area if we killed them in the forest? Well, that's because in the nightmare, they are different versions of themselves, the same essential beings, but created in the nightmare for the purpose of defending Queen Yharnam, which is pretty cool. And this time they're not a boss fight, they're just regular enemies, but they still do the same attacks. But by this point in the game, our character is a lot higher level. And our next area is the Nightmare Frontier. Yet again, another Nightmare realm, but this time not created by Mikolash or the School of Mensis or anything. But, everyone, that is where we are going to leave off for this video. So we are going to cover the rest of the book in the next part. Thank you so much for watching or listening. I hope you enjoyed all of the Bloodborne art and lore as much as I enjoyed talking about it. I will take any excuse to talk about Bloodborne to anyone, so getting to talk to YouTube or myself about Bloodborne is a treat. I really do appreciate your viewership. It means the world to me. if you are listening to this video while relaxing or with your eyes closed or while you are going to sleep, this is the end of the video, so I would click off now before the ad pops up at the end, because I don't want that to disturb your rest. So we will continue in part 3. I will do my best to make this a 3-parter. If it ends up being a 4-parter, that's only gonna be because of how much I talk about Bloodborne. I'm gonna try my best to make it so all art books only have at maximum 3 parts, except for some of the bigger ones. But yeah, again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Have a good evening.